Hey everybody, welcome back. So in today's video, I'm finally going to be going ahead and doing the video that I've been meaning to do for quite a long time here and sharing with you an explanation of taking you through my model that I've created of understanding psychedelic personal development, psychedelic therapy, as we understand it in 2022, based on all the information I've taken in. So let me just say a few things about it here, kind of set up your understanding about it, and then we'll go ahead and get into it. First things first, I want to say this is probably going to be a long video, I expect. So if you've clicked on this, first of all, thank you so much for your interest. There should be timestamps down below, all things going properly. I imagine I will shoot this in chunks, so this should all be kind of edited together with kind of timestamps to tell you what is where. In terms of context around the model, a few things I can say about it. First of all, this came through me, let's say, this summer, earlier this year, as an attempt to try to describe all the information I was taking in from all kinds of different sources and articulate into something that other people could understand, that I could communicate forward to other people. This is based partially in responses to questions I would see on forums, DMs, subreddits, these kinds of things about psychedelic therapy, how it's done, different approaches to it, what's the right approach, what should I do if I end up in this kind of space versus that kind of space, these kinds of questions. There's just so much confusion around how to use psychedelics for personal development, how to use psychedelics for psychedelic therapy, what psychedelic therapy is, how it works. It's mysterious, I get it. And so I want to try to pull together everything that I knew from all the readings, from all the talking to people behind the scenes, into something of a coherent one-page kind of map or model to try to describe it. So that's what this is. I do want to say this is not the be-all, end-all in terms of this information. There's probably stuff that I've omitted that might be important here. I'm certainly not claiming that to be a definitive expert on this. This is just my understanding, my perspective. And quite honestly, I've learned a lot since I put this model together, and there are certain things that I even think are a little bit outdated, but overall, I think it still holds up as a useful kind of map to look at different ways to approach this work. What else do I want to say about this? I'm very happy with how it came out. I think not only am I happy with how it looks, but I'm happy with the amount of information it's able to convey. On the note of how it looks, if I were more skilled in, using Photoshop or doing graphic design, I'm not, then perhaps it would have been shaped differently. This is just the best form I could put it in, but really it should probably be in some sort of a flowing infographic kind of thing. But that takes a lot of work and is kind of beyond my skill set when it comes to Photoshop and visual stuff. So we kind of got what we got with that. And again, this is a simplified, explanation of basically prep, what to do in session during a psychedelic experience, or different models or different explanations of what to do. I'm not even going to say it's a full, description of what to do. And then the kind of aftercare phase and some of the things that I think are common or appropriate there, and some of the other factors that don't get normally thought about or talked about that are huge impacts on the psychedelic experience. This is largely based on my own experience, having done psychedelics for 30 years of my life at this point. This is based on a lot of observation of other people. This is based on learning different models of different levels of consciousness, things like spiral dynamics, different forms of therapy and therapeutic techniques and psychology theory and blah, 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 blah. It's based on all that, plus based on everything that I found about all the different forms of psychedelic therapy out there, whether they are the study versions or the MAPS version or the underground versions. And it's kind of really a synthesis of all of that into something that I think is useful and hopefully coherent enough for you to kind of make some sense of once I show you. I do want to say really quick, you are absolutely invited to agree, disagree, comment, remind me of what I left out, these kinds of things by leaving a comment down below. I would love to just hear your thoughts on this. If you had an aha moment, if you're like, wow, that's actually useful, or that didn't really help me, or whatever, comment down below, interact, let me know what you think. I would really appreciate your opinions and your perspectives on this. And with that being said, I can't think of anything else I really need to say off the top of my head here. So, with my humble gratitude, thanks for your time and your attention. I'm sure it's going to be a long video here, but let's go ahead and just start talking about the model here and see what we see. All right, let's get into it. All right, let's go ahead and get into it here. So there is a lot of information here in this page. I know, I get it. And unfortunately, probably a little of this will be cut off. Probably up here in the corner, you will see my picture and you may miss some of the information there. I'll do my best to try to read to you what it says. But like I said, welcome to the psychedelic personal growth model, as I've termed it, for lack of a better term. This is really, again, a model just not necessarily to provide any new information, but just to package already known information into one cohesive place where we can kind of look and make sense of things. And again, in a perfect world, this would be some sort of a flow chart kind of a thing, but that is beyond my abilities. So here we are. As you can see, we basically have 3 stages broken up into 6 panels here. It looks like, yeah, 4 and 2, 6, yeah. So we've got prep, and then we've got dose is really part of prep, but we've got prep, and then we've got the session, and then we've got the aftercare section. And then we've kind of have these meta skills here down at the bottom, which are aspects of information, cultivation, aspects of your life and your growth path that impact every part of how this all goes down for you. So that's essentially what I've tried to put into this package here. So I'm going to just go ahead and go through the model here, start to explain to you each of these 6 sections so that you have a bit more understanding of, of kind of what I mean, what I'm saying here. And I'll explain obviously the meta skills at the end, and that should cover it. So without much further ado, let's go ahead and get started with, from left to right here, the most obvious place to start for an English reader and speaker, which would be the prep phase. So starting with prep, obviously we're talking about preparation before a journey. It's the things you can do to really set up yourself to have an optimized experience with psychedelics. I do want to say my own view of taking psychedelics based on both my own experience and based on science is that I think it's appropriate to think of it a little bit like bungee jumping is the metaphor I use a lot, where you never know. It's inherently chaotic, not chaotic in the bad sense, but chaotic in the unpredictable sense. By the very nature of the crosstalk of the various different regions of our brain that happens when we take a psychedelic, it's very likely that there's just a certain element of unpredictability that comes with the territory that's generally useful and good and healing and healthy, but also carries with it a little bit of risk, we could say, for a bad trip, but also, in terms of a requirement for skill to become good at adapting to and surfing the unpredictability of how this goes. So, when I'm talking about prep and when I'm talking about, psychedelic experiences, and I use all these funny metaphors like surfing or bungee jumping because they describe chaotic systems. Waves are chaotic. And while we know that they come in sets and there's kind of certain things we can predict about them, you never really know exactly how a wave is going to unfold until it unfolds. Same thing when you're bungee jumping, you never know exactly how you're going to bounce and what your rebound trajectories are going to be like after you jump off of whatever height you're jumping from to bungee jump. And so there's a certain element here where, we can prep. And then when we take the medicine, we have to just be in that adaptive, surfer, bungee jumper kind of mentality of being able to roll with the unpredictability of it and get good at adapting to it in real time and embracing it and working with it. So I want to say that up front because I think that's an important understanding to have as part of your preparation is I'm not preparing for something that I can be guaranteed to have. I'm not being prepared to, only have a bliss experience or only have a terrible, heavily emotional experience or only have a silly, recreational, giggling, laughing, like life is absurd type experience. or any of the other, thousands of shades of experience that are possible. I'm preparing for any and all of it to arise at any time. And I think that that's really a good mindset to start from. With prep, we see the basics here. You probably, I'm sure if you're even moderately interested in psychedelics, already know of the meme or the cliche of set and setting. There's not a whole lot to say about that. Set is make sure essentially you're in a good state. You're in a good mood. You're in a good place in yourself, good enough. There's interesting questions around set and setting when you're talking about therapeutic work, because obviously someone's going to therapy, maybe their set isn't great, and there's kind of a balance there. I think the distinction with set is you want to be stable. That's really the thing. You want to be stable. You want to be, okay, maybe I have some emotions I need to process, or a trauma pattern in my life that I'm working on that I'd really like to let go of, but I'm grounded, I'm stable, I'm regulated, I'm not panicky, I'm not desperate, I'm not, filled with anger or need or, some strong driven emotion that's out of balance. I'm in my center. I think that's really what you want to look for with set. And you might be in your center and still dealing with stuff, or in your center and sad because, something sad happened in your life or what have you. I think that probably is still going to be workable. Again, if you are, out of balance, if you are unstable, that's probably a bad set, and probably that should be a red flag to stop you from taking psychedelics until you come back to a more centered place. As part of set and setting both, I do want to mention really quick that it's a very good idea in the internet age, in the information age, to be very wise about all the media you're taking in, I would say at least for a week before your journey. So if you are doom scrolling, if you are, watching tons of, upsetting news or media, if you're really caught up in like political debates and getting, triggered or owning the other side, these kinds of things, if you are, watching a lot of horror films, like a lot of people just did for, the Halloween season, if you are any of that kind of stuff, I would recommend kind of taking some space before you do a journey. I think that's part of good set and setting. Setting wise, I've actually made a whole PDF that I send out to people whenever they ask for it on what to do for setting. But generally, you want soft, comfortable clothing. You want a super calm, super safe environment. Again, imagine you're like, a caterpillar that's going into a cocoon to totally melt down into liquid and reform into a butterfly. And that whole process is going to be a very sensitive thing that if it gets disturbed could really have a big impact on you. You want that level of chill. You want a super, super chill setting. That's good. That's optimal for you. Obviously, we have intention here. Intention is something that I think should be deeper than just, oh, I want to have this kind of experience. So there are a lot of different thoughts and opinions on intention. Here's my take on it. Generally, an open-ended intention is better than a specific one. Generally, a positive one is better than a fixing one. So, for example, let's say I'm working on depression and I want to know why I'm depressed. I might set an intention for, I would love to, discover more about what it feels like to not be depressed. So that's not a fixing one. But that's going to be useful in terms of your depression healing process, right? So generally a positive one, what I learned from one of the MAPS courses I took was that generally that correlates with a better experience. People who have fixing, problem solving type intentions tend to have harder experiences. You tend to go more into negative emotions and triggers and that kind of a thing. I think, my personal opinion, since I work with people on preparation and setting intention is a big part of that, what I really look for is what is the thing that the person is working through that's kind of an existential question that is in the background of the theme of whatever they're working on, that if they got clarity on that question would transform the problem. So I'm always looking at what's the unanswered question here that this person needs to know more about. And then we use that as an intention. So, trying to think of an example here off the top of my head without giving away any of my clients' information. Something like, if someone was struggling to, self-actualize, right, and to find purpose in life and find a career and move forward and kind of just like stuck doing nothing, right? Um, the core existential question there might be even just starting with, well, what's deeply and profoundly meaningful to this person that maybe they've totally forgotten about or aren't paying attention to or haven't noticed, right? And so that might be a cool intention, to have the intention of exploring what is deeply meaningful. Just open-ended, right? Something like that, I think, makes for a really good intention. I'm a big fan of doing pre-trip therapy to kind of pre-digest whatever the issue is that you want to have a transformative experience with. So you're starting to really work on it, break it down, start to get the unconscious mind really working on the issue already before you go ahead and do the session. And I'm so big on it that I've even had clients ask me things like, do I even need the session anymore? Like, is psychedelics even relevant? Like we've done so much work beforehand here. This all feels very, like taken care of, which is a really good place to be in, because then what happens after that is that the mind can take it deeper. The mind can open up the next level of what we need to heal or work on or look at or recognize, or if it's been healed. And this is an interesting thing that I've been working on as an idea, is using, pre-trip, doing the therapy kind of pre-trip, using the trip to actually integrate the therapy that was done before the trip. And then, and then if we need more integration afterwards, then we do more integration still. So psychedelics or psychedelic journey can not only be a source of content from which we need to integrate afterwards, it can also be a source of integration for work we've done while we're sober, in therapy. So I'm a big fan of pre-trip therapy. Doesn't matter if it's something like I do, which is coaching and hypnotherapy, or like full psychotherapy, somatic therapy. I don't think it matters. Point is, working on the content before you're in the psychedelic space seems to be really helpful and really productive. From there, obviously, if you're doing ayahuasca, there's the whole component of dieta and really kind of like, dialing things back, calming yourself down, centering yourself, abstaining from what needs abstaining in terms of, maybe alcohol or certain types of foods or what have you. I think all of that is very wise and definitely a good idea and should be followed. Okay, so that's prep in a nutshell. There's not a whole lot to say about it. Now we move kind of into the next bar over, which is about dose. That's all obviously pretty self-evident here. We've got high, medium, and low, right? And so this kind of, if we move from left to right, this kind of implies that the things that are at the same zone as high kind of correlate with higher dosages, medium with medium dosages, low with lower dosages, more or less, but not exactly. There's place, again, this is why I would prefer a flow chart to this kind of thing, but I'll explain as we go. Okay, so next would be trip structure, right? So what kind of trip structure do you do? Do you do a self-guided journey? Do you get a guide? Do you have someone just trips at you? Do you kind of just have a recreational experience, like at like a festival or a concert, or with your friends going hiking or what have you? Or is this a microdose experience? So kind of what's kind of your intention in terms of how intense you want this experience to be? As you've noticed, may have noticed here, I've kind of made some indicators just to give you a sense that obviously as we move up towards the top of this section, we're looking at being higher, so a more intense experience. And as we go towards the bottom here, we're looking at lower, meaning lower intensity, lower dosage, usually 2. And so you kind of see what I mean here, right? So if we start at the bottom, right, a low dose and low intensity experience is going to be a microdose. That's generally going to involve you going about whatever you go about in your normal day, more or less, but just having the support of a microdose that kind of gives you a little bit of that. It's almost like a supplement kind of a vibe where it just kind of like perks you up a bit. It's like you being at your best, you being a little sharper, a little happier, a little easier, a little more energetic, but essentially more or less the same you. Kind of at that low medium zone, it's kind of where I think of your typical recreational dose. Obviously, there are going to be people who might see this or may never see it who decide to take, let's say, exercise their option to take much larger doses in recreational settings, which obviously comes with more risk. I don't really want to pass judgment on it because I've been there myself. I have a lot of friends who do that, and I get it. And there's a time and there's a place for it, but it is obviously higher risk. And generally, I think when I'm thinking of a recreational psychedelic experience, that's going to be in that low to medium dose range. So, for a psilocybin experience or an LSD, that might be like a gram of psilocybin, something like that, and maybe 100 micrograms, 75 micrograms of LSD, something like that. As we go more into the mid of the medium in terms of dosage range, this is kind of where we see a self-guided journey might be useful. So this is maybe like a home dose where you're taking enough to really have an experience. If you close your eyes, you're probably going to have visuals. If you're prone to having visuals, you're probably going to have like a real psychedelic trip. You're going to have an experience, but it's going to be maybe something that you can still handle. You can still work with, you can still kind of sit and meditate with, walk yourself through, self-reflect on, work on, and generally you're self-contained. You're not going to melt down. You're not going to fall apart. You're not going to, totally lose it. You feel safe enough to do a self-guided journey, but you're high enough that you're having effects and experiences and really having a proper psychedelic journey, right? I would say that that's, again, best dosed at kind of like a medium zone. You don't really want to exceed medium. Okay, and then as we start to go into higher doses, we start to move up to this next level, which is where your mind may not work well enough to really facilitate your own healing session, right? And this is where a guide starts to become useful. So from what I know, talking with different guides, it sounds like it's pretty common for guided experiences to be on the higher end of the dose range. And then the guide really does a lot of supporting being the mental clarity, the mental focus, being attuned to all the different aspects of the person's journey, while the journeyer is just really absorbed in the intensity of the experience. So as you kind of move, to these kind of higher doses, I think self-guided is less advisable. It's not that it can't be done. I know there's a lot of psychonauts out there that do so. If it works for you, more power to you. No judgment, no shade. Just saying, for a lot of people, that starts to be where a guide is really kind of wise. And then if you go turbo and you just like fully go for, there's nobody home, brain is like, on autopilot completely, and there's no, rational cognitive, functioning, and you're just a psychedelic goo ball for 12 or more hours. That's really where I think trip sitting is well advised, a good idea. The higher the dose, the more chaotic this system becomes, if you want to think of it that way. And so it really becomes smart to just have someone to just hold space with you. Make sure you're good. Make sure you stay hydrated, make sure that, you don't break anything or hurt yourself or any of these kinds of things. So that's generally where I think a trip sitter is necessary. Even if you're pretty experienced, it's still probably a good idea. If you are totally new, never, done it before, have a trip sitter. Have a trip sitter. Couldn't hurt is all I could say about that. Couldn't hurt, So, even if you're going to take a low medium dose, somewhere in the recreational zone, if you've never done it before, have a buddy, have someone, or even if it's just someone, available on the phone to trip sit you, have someone just hold space with you. It's a good idea. Okay. Hopefully this all makes sense so far. switching over from trip structure, that's kind of how you're formatting your experience externally and situationally. Trip focus, right? So we're still kind of similarly here. We've kind of shifted from dosage reference to what you might call, and I'm not a huge fan of this term, but you'll probably know what I mean, vibrational experience. So if you're going in a higher vibrational experience or a lower vibrational experience, or towards love, if you will, or towards fear. So in the trip focus here, what we're talking about is where to place your attention, or what I mean is where to place your attention based on kind of where you end up, right? So you've done all your prep here, you choose your dosage, hopefully wisely, and you're not just a total Yahoo about it. You choose the right trip structure for that dosage range, again, not being a Yahoo about it. And then the chaotic system kind of spits you out in somewhere between, total love and total fear, let's say, as the polarities here. And what do you do? What do you tune into? What do you focus on? What do you work with, depending on how high you get, or kind of, what state you end up in as kind of an overall theme or feeling or emotion to the journey? I think this is a really interesting question. There are obviously a lot of answers. And I think the real, if you're talking to like a real deal guide or a shaman, obviously there's an element of adaptability and working with it in the moment. I think there's a lot to be said in terms of learning how to surrender to whatever you're experiencing, feel the feelings, embrace the experience, welcome it, go into whatever it is you're experiencing, whether it's ecstasy or, terror, or, having some sort of weird encounter with an entity or what have you. If you engage it and you surrender and allow yourself to experience it, that's generally a good idea. But as with all those caveats kind of out of the way here, with trip focus, I'm going to start from the top here. If you get high and then all of a sudden you just end up in this really intensely blissful place, and you surrender into that blissful space, and it's kind of opening your heart, and your heart opens up and you feel this loving oneness for all of life. If you really ride that as deep as it goes, it will take you beyond your sense of self and into a feeling of oneness with everything, which is the mystical experience. And so if you go way towards love, you're going to end up at something that's mystical, that's transpersonal, that's beyond language to describe, and really is some sort of all one. Everything is perfect. Everything is beautiful. I'm inside everything. Everything's inside me. Where everything's interconnected, kind of dissolution of your own narrative and sense of self type experience. Generally speaking, in terms of, I think that's the ideal. There are different schools of thought in psychedelic therapy that might say something like, that's actually not desirable, or that's not what you want for healing. But I would disagree, not only based on the kind of the emotional implications of an ecstatic mystical experience like that, but also based on kind of what we're seeing about the science, based on, what is the most psychedelic of psychedelic things, based on a lot of different things. I think it all converges on the mystical experience as being optimal, ideal. But it's something you can kind of learn how to open up to, but it's not something you can really control. And so if you don't end up there, then you don't end up there. But if you do end up there, you want to just like let yourself go completely into it. It will feel like you're dying for a moment, but you're not going to die, obviously. And what you will have instead is an ecstatic experience that may be the most meaningful thing that's ever happened in your entire life. So that being said, let's say you don't end up there. Let's say you're really in this high vibrational, joyful, blissful, happy, well-being kind of space, but that's not transcending into like a dissolution of yourself. There's like an ego structure still kind of there. There's still a sense of self there. That's what I would call going into your states of being. So this is really where you develop what I call big resource states. So this might be, feelings of well-being, of joy, of peace, of wisdom, of bliss, of gratitude, of enthusiasm for life again, of fascination at the complexity and the depth of the cosmos and of life, of gratitude for this moment and being alive and this vantage point, and this experience of being on psychedelics, of these kinds of states of being where you're just like, you can just close your eyes and embody this sense of beingness that's so filled with ecstatic goodness of different sorts. And I think if you end up there, that alone, if you can really soak up and remember how it feels to feel these really good feelings, becomes incredible fuel for personal transformation afterwards. And so I would encourage you, if you end up in a high vibrational state like that, to just soak it up, soak it in, and really allow the healingness of being in the presence of your own profoundly positive experience to just fill you up and let it be what it is. So that's kind of what I would focus on if I was really in a positive, loving, blissful place, but that didn't fully transcend. I'd go deep into, feelings of gratitude, feelings of awe, feelings of humility, feelings of love, feelings of joy, of bliss, of ecstasy, these kinds of things. If you vibrationally kind of, let's say, end up somewhere more in the middle, neither totally super high vibrational joy, loving bliss, everything's all good, neither totally in trauma land, you're somewhere in the middle there between these polarities, if you will. That's kind of where I think it's really useful to start reflecting on your conditioning and your values. Now, what I mean by conditioning is all the kind of things that we've acquired, ideas, ways of being, opinions, value systems, emotional patterns, things that we've kind of absorbed through growing up and being socialized that have shaped us or are in our awareness as part of the milieu of our, of our society, of our peers, that we may or may not agree with. So a lot of times we soak up all this kind of social conditioning, personal conditioning, conditioning from friends and family and, wherever we grew up in the world, these kinds of things. And we don't really reflect on any of it. It's just kind of in there, in us, ambiently in the background of our mind. And we don't really reflect on, do I agree or disagree with this opinion or this worldview or this, way of approaching life or, this, this set of conditioning. Do I agree or do I not? And therefore, we're not in ownership of it because we haven't really, taken the time to take ownership of it. It's just kind of in there, and it kind of owns us a little bit in the sense that it's taking up, space inside our awareness, and we haven't really resolved it one way or the other. With that, is values. And I think reflecting on values and getting clear what our values are on psychedelics is very powerful and very useful. By values, I mean those kind of abstract concepts in life that are deeply, deeply important to us, that are deeply meaningful to us. And, not everyone shares the same values, right? So some examples. One person might deeply value freedom. Another person might deeply value strength. Another person might deeply value peace. Another person might deeply value fairness and kindness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to think through what's important to you as a human being, that really makes life meaningful to you. What is meaningful to you? What's not meaningful to you? What is important to you? From your culture, from your upbringing, from the way you've learned to be, from your character, what isn't important to you that other people are, or other conditioned forces outside of you are trying to make important to you. Start to make that distinction and own what conditioning you want to keep from your culture, and what your real values are, and own that, and really make the distinction and take ownership of what's yours and start to let go of what's not yours. So that would be kind of in this middle vibrational space. That's kind of what I think is the most useful thing you can do, or one of the most useful things you can do. as we kind of drift down vibrationally towards fear. So let's say you're having kind of a heavy, not so fun experience, and there's a lot that's on your mind and your system's processing, and you're kind of, like, God, this feeling or this opinion and these fears or these angers, or there's kind of emotions coming up that are kind of difficult to deal with. I think what becomes really useful at that level of vibration or level of consciousness, however you want to think of it, is learning how to recognize the pattern, right? So recognizing the pattern, in your family history, where did you learn these patterns of emotion and feeling from? Where did they learn it from? Recognizing the pattern in yourself. Where did this feeling first pop up? What was the first experience you had that started to create this worldview you have that now you're kind of contending with and struggling with? Where are you embodying this? Where are you doing the thing, for example, that you don't like that other people have done to you in some other area of your life? Starting to notice more of the pattern around this issue, and really where it came from, and also, what triggers you to go back into feeling bad, right? What are the life experiences you have, things people say to you, things you say to yourself, certain things you see in your environment, etc., that start to kind of trigger off the pattern for you, So that's another thing to really look at and really get a good sense of. And that becomes really easier to do if you're kind of ending up in this negative emotion kind of space. And then if you really end up really at the deep end of fear, of feeling bad, of feeling overwhelmed, of feeling super just like overloaded, deeply upset, these kinds of things, that's really where trauma release becomes really the way to go. Just working with your nervous system in a compassionate way and allowing it to discharge whatever traumatic content is trying to come up and come out. And that might be through shaking it out, doing trauma release exercises, or what they do like in the PSIP, psychedelic somatic model. That might be, doing some sort of breath work thing. That might be doing, some sort of a release work for yourself. There's all kinds of tools and techniques out there. I don't want to get too deep into techniques or modalities here, but generally, if you're really far in the fear side of things, it's going to be about feeling and processing through that and allowing your body to just unload that energy. Okay, with all that being said, we're going to shift over here to the intervention kind of module phase. I don't know what the hell I'm calling this thing. So when it comes to what intervention to do, so again, we have a little bit of a change here, because I didn't have an easy way to kind of to describe this, but essentially, if at the extremes here, if you got higher, right? If you took a lot of the medicine and you got higher, and one version of higher, the higher you go on psychedelics, the more, again, it becomes higher risk, and you really do end up either kind of at a really ecstatic thing or something really stressful and traumatic and difficult. And so, or at least for most people, as we're working through things and healing, that's the case. So I kind of put those at the edges. And then, if you are, not so high, there are different interventions that I would, use that are different than if you're more high, basically. So let's talk about the higher ones first at the edges, and then we'll talk about the ones in the middle here. So, if you get really, really high and it goes really, really well, and you're having an ecstatic, blissful experience, the intervention really at that point, if you're at mystical experience type territory, is just going to be surrender, allow yourself to merge into the entirety of the universe, allow yourself to just completely dissolve into the light of the universe, and enjoy it, and let it teach you and let it heal you. And then you can integrate that later in the aftercare phase. So if you're going to get really high and it goes really well and it's really ecstatic, that's probably the best thing you can do. Don't try to do any therapeutic thing with your mystical experience. Just allow it to unfold through you, and then you can use that later in integration to do healing work. If you kind of get to this really like middle high zone where, a guide would be smart, or you end up at like states of being, but not a full-blown mystical experience, this is really where having, again, a guide that can kind of help you regulate and adapt and support you in real time to open up deeper and work with what's coming up becomes really useful. So real-time regulation is kind of the way I'm describing what guides often do, which is a lot of interactive, support of helping you to stay engaged in something that's really going to be healing and transformative. So if you get to a really high place, but again, you're not like totally out of body, that's where real-time regulation is probably really helpful, where maybe you'd be a little overwhelmed to just be that high by yourself. If you get really high, again, on the other end here, I should have said this earlier, in the kind of difficult end of things, that's where maybe tremoring out trauma, fear, anxiety, just allowing your body to discharge whatever that energy is can be really helpful. It can be a little frightening, but if you do it before the psychedelic session, so that you're familiar with that experience, then just trust your body to discharge. That's going to be really helpful if you get really high and it's kind of more of an anxious, stressful type experience. Okay, so coming to the middle here, we've got a few of these, if you're not so high, if you're in the medium zone, or even kind of, didn't take as much and you're kind of lower, there are different interventions that become more possible here. One of the major ones is the meta pattern, which is something I haven't talked about on the channel, but all the people in my group coaching know about it. And it's really at the heart of the work that I do. There are parallel forms of therapy like coherence therapy or therapeutic memory reconsolidation, which all tie into this meta pattern. This meta pattern is just another way of kind of describing that same process. That can be really powerful. That is the heart and soul of personal transformation work. So doing the meta pattern, on medicine can be really transformative because things just go deeper. So that's one thing you could really do. That'd be huge. Another one is core transformation. Core transformation is a process created by, Connie Ray Andreas. It's an NLP process that takes us all the way down to our core states and then heals all the levels and layers of issues between that core state and where we were with the issues. So it's profound, deep work. And again, something that could be really useful at a medium to low dose range in terms of having a really healing, transformative experience. Very beautiful work. Emotive journeying is another, form of a similar thing where you kind of like feel whatever you're feeling, and then you kind of use that to drop into what feeling is underneath that, then use that to drop into what's underneath that kind of a thing. That can be very powerful as well on psychedelics. I've had some amazing healings that way. So that'd be another one. Obviously, parts work, whether IFS or other forms of parts work, becomes really viable and really powerful and really useful in kind of this medium to lower dosage range. Once you get too high, parts work starts to get very confusing because you just don't, your cognitive faculties are just so overwhelmed that it's a lot to keep track of. So again, that's something that's best left to a moderate dose range. Wholeness work, same thing. Self-inquiry. So this is an interesting one because it's really just so simple. It's just like the Buddhist spiritual practice of really inquiring into, whatever the issue is that you want to think about or resolve, or inquiring into the nature of self. What am I? What is this? What's underneath that? What's underneath that? What's even deeper still? What's the most fundamental, foundational thing about me or about the situation? And continuing to go in and just inquire can be really, really powerful. And then dimensions of mind is something I'm not really using or thinking about as much as I was when I wrote this on this model here. But essentially, there's a whole way of relating to the issue that has to do with spatialization. So a lot of times when we're thinking of a problem in our life, we tend to think of it as being in front of us, for example. We tend to think of it as being right in the here and now with us. And it's usually of a certain size in front of us and kind of physically, metaphorically occupying a certain amount of space, right, in our attention or imagination or what have you. And there's things you can do with that, like imagining stepping around and outside of whatever the problem is and looking at it like a shape from different angles. Things like this that sound really weird and far out, but can have really powerful transformative effects. So I put that in there because it does tend to map well to a certain type of mind state on the psychedelic experience, where we can really unstick ourselves from the issue by remapping whatever the problem is or how we think of the problem inside our heads in terms of dimensionality, and allowing ourselves maybe to be taller than it or above it or bigger than it, or these kinds of things. So that's another kind of work that I think works well at again, low to medium dosage levels that I've been kind of playing with and developing as one of the kind of hypnotic processes with psychedelics that can really be transformative. I guess that's really all there is to say about intervention. Obviously, there's a lot more types of interventions out there. For example, I hadn't really put any somatic things on here. There are all kinds of other interventions you can do just in terms of prompts, reading back, having someone read back stuff to you that you want to think about, that you wrote down when you're sober, or, hypnosis, like I do, like conversational hypnosis could be on here. All the other kinds of work, the types of therapy, or also the non-intervention, so I've listed interventions here, but then there's also just allowing the inner guide, the inner healer, to just do what it does as well, which is kind of what they do in a lot of studies, for example. So there's that. Okay, now let's go ahead and just kind of pop on over to Aftercre here and talk about this a bit. And then we will kind of talk about meta skills, and that'll wrap the video here. So for Aftercre, in an earlier iteration of the model, I'd actually called this, I think I forget what I call it, but Aftercare here is this last section, and there's definitely some processes we want to go through here that are part of good aftercare. So these are not necessarily tied high to low to what I mentioned in these inner four kind of bubbles here, but I want to just kind of go over this really quick. So one of the most important things you can do for good aftercare is going to be a QC check, or a quality control check, of the insights and the thoughts and the experiences and the ideas that you had on the medicine. This is super important because psychedelics in general lead us to more broad, expansive, abstract modes of thinking. And we can get weird mixes of absolute profound truth and clarity and insight mixed with kind of gobbledygook or garbage floating up from the surface of our minds, or fantasy, or emotional thinking, or half-truths, or maybe we regress into a childlike part that's thinking from its kind of level of consciousness. And all of that can get blended together in our insights. And so it's super important afterwards, I think, to take some time and really evaluate, the insights you walked away with from the experience that may have felt super true in the moment. Do they still feel true? Do they check out logically? Is there, a rationale to them or logic to them? If you apply these ideas in your life, what's likely to happen? Is it generally going to be good, or generally going to be destructive? Or questionable, et cetera, et cetera. You want to really, if we've gone into this really non-rational, metaphoric, deep, spiritual, fleeting, fluid, expansive, transcendental kind of state and experience, and had all these epiphanies and insights and realizations, that's really beautiful. There's a lot of fertile, useful stuff there. but we want to counterbalance it by being specific, by being practical, by being grounded, by being clear, by challenging our own ideas. And that's really what quality controlling your own thinking ultimately boils down to, is exactly that, challenging the things that float through your head, because not everything that floats through your head is right or true or accurate or even, personal to you. You might have just had some piece of, again, of conditioning floating through your mind that you hadn't even really, taken ownership of, and then it just floated through, and you're like, wow, that makes sense, but it's like, again, quality control your thinking afterwards to make sure it's right. That's all there is to say about that. Integration questions and integration practices I really should have put on here. Integration to me, as I've said on this channel a couple times here, I'm sure I'll be saying it a lot more, is something more specific than just generally kind of sense making of what happened to your experience. It's much more about connecting the dots neurologically inside your brain and helping different circuits and regions and aspects of yourself connect together to make a more cohesive whole. It's about taking these big resource states that I was talking about earlier, bringing them back into your life and connecting them into where they need to go to empower you or heal you or transform your life. That's integration to me. So aftercare should involve integration of, again, what was useful, but you don't know what was useful or profound or meaningful unless you do a little bit of a quality control check on some of your insights. Also, for aftercare, I just did a recent video about this. Grounding practices, super important. So if you got your bell rung really good from the ayahuasca or the mushroom or what have you, and you are a little manic, you're a little unsure what is real and what's not real, you feel a little destabilized, you feel a little lost and floaty, these kinds of things. Some of that's just natural kind of afterglow kind of stuff, but you want to ground out. You want to come back to your body. You want to come back to your mind. You want to come back to your presence. You want to own and embody your experience again and feel what it feels like to be physical and be human again. That's really important. Expanding your map of reality is the other. So if I could nail down the three kind of aftercare things that I think are really distinctly important to psychedelics in specific, it would be the integration part. It would be grounding and expanding your map of reality. So again, if you have some sort of paradigm shattering transcendental experience that calls into question everything you thought you knew about yourself, life, the universe, et cetera, and it's really clashing with who you were before the psychedelic, and you don't know what to believe, and you don't know what's real, and you don't know what's true. Situations like that, where you've just you've been flooded with new insights that you don't know what to do with. It's really about learning how to expand your map of reality to account for those new experiences and reconcile them in a way that really makes good sense to you, so that you can, instead of trying to import these things that might be beyond your current map of reality and shrink them down into your more narrow view of life and the world, the thing to do is to expand yourself and expand your map and your understanding so that it's big enough to accommodate what it is that you just experienced. And this is really important. Again, a lot of people sometimes hit me up and they're like, they want help with integration, or so they say. And then they start talking to me, and really what it is they have all these existential questions that they don't have answers for. And there's nothing to integrate out of that unless there was some sort of, mystical experience. And they're like, I would like to integrate that feeling of oneness, or I'd like to integrate that feeling of love for all of life, or something like that. That could be integrated. But if someone's just sitting there with a bunch of am I real? Is reality real? How can something like this exist? Are the entities real? These kinds of questions are really about expanding your map, in the way I think about it. Again, you'll notice I have the meta pattern here, I think 3 times. So obviously I think it's really important as an intervention, yes, as change work, yes, but also as aftercare. So again, we can use the meta pattern as a tool for integration that we can use to really do transformative work in again taking all this amazing beautiful experience that we've had and wiring that back into our sense of self, integrating that into who we are and how we are embodied in our day-to-day life moving forward all the time. Again, this is such an essential skill, which is why it's on there 3 times. So the meta pattern it's deep. It's something I should be doing more videos on, but I'm just thinking about how I want to talk about it. Also in Aftercare, which really, this model of Beyond Goals, this comes from John Overdurf, is something I would probably maybe even put inside of integration as part of the integration process. But the Beyond Goals approach essentially is, okay, you now know, maybe you got some guidance from your higher self or from your inner guidance or, from what have you, from the universe that you should change your life in some particular way, and you got some sort of like, okay, I need to exercise more. I need to stop, watching so much TV. I need to, eat better. These kinds of very basic messages that sometimes hit us like a ton of bricks on psychedelics and are profound. And it's like, okay, it's time to improve my life. It's time, let's go. And so the Beyond Goals thing is really a way of approaching that, where we do lots of small baby steps that add up over time and kind of create an exponential growth curve, as opposed to setting a huge goal and then like trying to just like rush after it, towards something totally new and radically revamp some area of our life. If we create these like small doable goals and get kind of momentum of achieving small doable steps towards the goal, that's really what Beyond Goals is about. So it's about turning goals from these kind of big things into small little micro processes that we do regularly instead of just every now and then. And those add up over time to really big transformative experiences. Other thing that I think is really helpful is future pacing. I would also probably include that in integration. Future pacing is a form of stepping into a future you and feeling what it feels like after this integration or this wisdom or this growth has already happened, registering what the future you feels like in your body, registering what the future you might have to tell you in terms of advice or experience, this kind of a thing. So it's really about stepping into a future version where whatever transformation you're working on has already taken place, and feeling what that feels like and really absorbing that. And that's an important part of Aftercare, because a lot of times in the psychedelic session, you get the vision. You're like, oh shit, I want to do that, or that's possible for me. And then there's this whole question of how am I going to get there when you come down, and what are the practicals of that? And then, sometimes we can feel disconnected from that future after we've come back to our default mode of consciousness. So future pacing is a nice way to kind of connect ourselves through visualization and imagination to what that future experience might be like. Okay, so that covers the 6 kind of major bubbles of this model here, but we still have the meta skills. So I want to go over these really quick, and I think that will probably cover it for the video here. So hopefully you're enjoying this. Let me know, by the way, if any of this doesn't make sense, you have more questions, leave a comment down below. I will try to get back to you about it and see if I can answer your question about it. So let's go ahead and talk about the meta skills here. So this is an important point in and of itself that I've never heard anyone else talk about with psychedelics, which is that it's easy with psychedelics to start to think that they take you the deepest place possible, and that there's no area of yourself that psychedelics can't touch or can't change. And in my experience, that's not entirely true. There are actually aspects of yourself that won't transform just from a psychedelic experience. And there are aspects of yourself and aspects of your growth and maturation process that impact what happens in a psychedelic journey, in how you set intentions and what your trip is like and how you do aftercare. The journey, the psychedelic experience is impacted by these skills. In other words, these skills are bigger than psychedelics, and psychedelics are contained inside and impacted by these skills. And so I want to just kind of bring them up because they impact every part of this whole experience. And I'm about to sneeze. Or not. Oh, it's the worst. Okay. Anyways, I guess it's going to go. Oh, that's the worst. Okay, sorry guys. So meta skill number one, and again, this is redundant as well, is quality controlling your thinking. And the reason I bring this up as a meta skill and not just here in Aftercare, which it's also in, it's an important part of Aftercare specifically about the trip, but in general in your life, you want to start to get good at questioning and noticing the thoughts that move through your head and questioning whether or not those thoughts are valid, factual, useful, whether or not you should take those thoughts personally or literally, or if they're just some emotional thinking coming from some part of you. It's really important to start to make that distinction. It's really dawned on me this year how much your average person really is not very skilled at knowing how to simply observe the thoughts that float through us without reacting to them. Just being like, oh, there's a part of me that's a little angry. Oh, there's a part of me that's talking trash right now, and not get swept away in it, right? Like that's a really useful skill as a life skill. And obviously, if you're able to quality control your thinking, this reflects back on, your intention setting and pre-trip therapy. This reflects back on your whole trip experience and how you navigate it and, how you deal with what comes up and ultimately kind of where you end up and what you learn. How you quality control your thinking, obviously, is a part of Aftercare, as I've already mentioned here. So it's an important skill that impacts all kinds of areas of the psychedelic experience and transcends it. It's bigger than the psychedelic experience because, again, you're going about your day. There's all kinds of places where learning how to quality control your thinking comes in really handy. Next is self-regulation. I just did a recent video on 10 types of self-regulation, which I highly recommend you check out if you haven't yet. Self-regulation is an important life skill of learning how to de-escalate stress states or overwhelm or fight or flight activation or triggers or however you want to think of it. Learning how to bring yourself back to that centered, nice, parasympathetic, relaxed, present, social, easy mode of being. Self-regulation is something we should all know in terms of self-maintenance and life maintenance and relationship maintenance and mental health maintenance that very few of us are taught. And really, unless you're kind of, doing the work in terms of personal healing, you probably have never even heard of it, don't know about it. And it's the most important skill you've never heard of that nobody has that we should all have. Self-regulation, again, so if we're talking about de-escalating strong emotions, triggers, overwhelm, this kind of a thing. Obviously, again, this becomes really useful inside the journey. You get overwhelmed, you start to know how to regulate. You intuitively discover how to regulate. When it comes to preparation, again, self-regulation, if you're triggered, that's bad for set and setting, so knowing how to self-regulate puts you back into proper set and setting. Self-regulation, again, if your intention setting is coming from a highly charged emotional place, that may not be helpful either. Again, self-regulation can kind of help you come to a more clear, balanced place in yourself before you're making big decisions. Again, crucial life skill, transcends the psychedelic experience, but impacts it heavily. Next one, again, like I said, this is the third time we've seen it in this chart here, is the meta pattern. And the meta pattern really is, I'm trying to say this in all kinds of different ways, the heart and the soul of personal transformation work and how we rewire our brains. When you understand the meta pattern, you understand how to transform issues, point blank. And it's just about application and getting good at it and doing it a lot. And so the meta pattern is something that really transforms every area of your life because it's the key to healing. It's the key to release. It's the key to letting go of the issue of rewiring yourself, right? And so that becomes, again, deeply useful. It's something you can do during a journey. It's something you can do in pre-trip therapy to prepare for a journey. It's something you can do for integration. afterwards, the meta pattern comes in. It really should be the thing we're doing all the time if we really want to transform, we really want to heal. Another one worth mentioning here that is a little obvious but still worth saying is any education you have and any practices you have. In specific, I mean things like obviously reading philosophy, reading spirituality, reading about neuroscience, the brain, the mind, any practices like meditation, pranayama, yoga, therapeutic practices you might know, stuff like this that really become tools of transformation and tools of well-being and tools of insight. I think obviously, benefit the entirety of your life, but obviously have amplified relevance inside of a psychedelic experience. You want to be continuing to educate yourself about what the heck this weird meat suit is, how it works, how it interacts with other weird meat suits, and how psychedelics interact with all of that. And I think to me that's easy because I'm fascinated by that stuff. I find it. I have a passion for it. It's just endlessly like full of juice and wow for me. So that's not a big deal. But if you aren't someone who's well educated on any of this stuff, you haven't read any, even the basics like Alan Watts or, Ram Dass or something like that. You've never really meditated. You don't really have any breathwork practices or haven't done yoga. None of that. That would be a great set of things to start to pick up because again, this skill, the more there's a whole set of skills you pick up from that kind of stuff that really reflects back on the quality of your journeys in a huge way. And I've seen this over and over and over, hanging out with friends who meditate versus those that don't while we're all psychedelic and talking about the kinds of experiences they have. And there's definitely a distinct difference there. So I would strongly encourage you to continue your education or take up your education on a philosophical, spiritual level and start to develop practices that work for you, and maybe that's, who knows, maybe that's stretching, maybe that's breath work, maybe that's drawing and painting, or, I'm agnostic about what that is. Find stuff that works for you, but definitely, develop something. Next thing I want to mention as a meta skill here, might be a little controversial to some because some people do not like this model, but I think spiral dynamics or something like it is highly, highly relevant to the psychedelic experience. Spiral dynamics is a whole huge conversation, which I won't be getting into on this channel probably. If you're interested in it, while I don't necessarily recommend all his videos, I do think actualize.org and Leo's videos on spiral dynamics are actually really well put together, very articulate, full of lots of great details about all the different stages. But basically spiral dynamics, if you've never heard of it, is a model of stages of personal development that we both go through personally and go through collectively and are going through historically. Spiral dynamics describes what are called stages or memes or paradigms, and these stages or memes or paradigms that we move through are kind of centered around certain worldviews or certain sets of values and belief systems. And the different stages don't necessarily get along with each other. There's a lot of clash between different people in different stages. And I think all of that is super important to know. And here's why. Ken Wilber does a great job of articulating this, and I have to credit him because this is really his idea or his distinction. But in psychedelics, you have people who have these glimpses into their own potential or the potential of human beings, potential of humanity to be highly evolved, let's say. And there's confusion there that often happens where people make this assumption, this kind of logical leap that waking up, that gaining insight is the same thing as behaving or growing up in a more mature manner, in a more self-actualized, higher, vibrational manner. what Ken Wilber pointed out is that the stage of your development, in other words, what paradigm you're in or what stage you're in, is not at all the same thing as what level of consciousness you went to on a psychedelic. And that really that whatever stage you're in will determine how you interpret what you experience on psychedelics. So, and there's a little bit of, it is a little bit of a two-way thing where psychedelics can help nudge you into a different stage or awaken different stages in you or start to plant the seeds of certain stages within you. But this is one of those reasons why we, for example, have psychedelic narcissists, because their stage of personal development is still at a narcissistic stage of development, but maybe they have an awakening that's kind of transcendent, but it's going to be interpreted through the lens of that narcissistic worldview. And so it's really important to start to know spiral dynamics in these stages of development and value systems that we move through, so that we are not confusing the psychedelic experience for our stage, and we're not confusing other people's place, whatever stage they're in, as being the same as ours. I think it's really important. Again, this impacts the entire experience for you. The last thing I want to mention here, again, another one that no one talks about in the psychedelic space, but it's so incredibly important to start to get and understand, is how we are shaped, how our drives, our needs, our ambitions, our goals, the meaning making we do is all shaped through the lens of evolutionary psychology. And I think if you want to look for the bottom of the barrel, the most real of the real of what it means to be a human being, we're going to find that information in evolutionary psychology. I would even go so far, and this is kind of a shocking, mind-blowing thing to say. I've had people like have huge aha moments after I said this. I would even put it like this: there's nothing you or I could possibly ever experience that is outside of the container of how evolution has already shaped us. So spirituality, the transcendent, psychedelics, all the insights, all the learning, all the things, all exist inside the container of our evolutionary history. And so, again, this is one of those things that's meta too, that's bigger than psychedelics, but massively impacts our understanding of psychedelics. And it's interesting how often issues that people have, that they're working through, are actually evolutionary psychology issues that people are assuming are just a normal personal psychological issue, and don't understand the kind of underlying genetic thing that's driving, the way they're wired and the issue. And so evolutionary psychology is just super handy for understanding this whole thing, psychedelics and personal healing, personal transformation, in a whole other light that I think is, not always flattering, to be frank. I don't always like the reflections there, but there's truth to it that I think is really useful and is really grounding and is a nice kind of counterbalance to the cosmic weirdness that psychedelics kind of bring to the table. So yeah, so that's it. So that's this model, this map. I hope this makes sense. So again, you've kind of got left to right here in terms of the arc of the journey, high to low with dose, kind of, but then that changes over with the intervention thing. And then you have these meta skills here, and these impact every part of your psychedelic experience. So this to me is what I've been wanting to describe as all the kind of moving pieces to consider with psychedelic experience. And even this is, quite frankly, still oversimplified. There's still a lot more we could say, but I hope it's helpful. I hope it's at least insightful or interesting or useful to you. And I would love to know what you think about it. So I think we're going to wrap it here. And if you dug this, do a favor and do the old thumbs up or like or subscribe or comment down below. And if you have any questions, leave them down below, and I'm happy to answer them and, maybe do more videos on this map in the future if necessary. So I guess that's all for now. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, wishing you all the best, and have a beautiful moment in time, day or night, wherever you are. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care.